Welcome, everybody. How are you? Come on in. Today, we are having a topic very close to my heart, as a lot of you know, since some of you may have attended the reading we did in the fall around the SS Columbia. Welcome to a virtual look at the SS Columbia, the oldest passenger steamer, with also a look at one of its most amazing riders, which we'll talk about, and some of the amazing history made on her decks. Untapped New York is happy to have you with us today. This tour is being presented. We have a cadre of presenters today. This is one of our largest panels of presenters. SS Columbia Project's co-chair Ian Danick, filmmaker Aaron Schlesinger and Schillinger, sorry, Aaron, author and journalist and community activist Desiree Cooper, and SS Columbia Project board member Raymond Fusco. They will all be presenting throughout the presentation. So as always, if you are wanting to chat, the chat tab on the far left side is the way you do it. If you have questions for any of our panelists, please put them in the question tab right next door. If you're having any audio or visual issues with the presentation, best to refresh your page. Don't worry, you won't have to log back in or find your link. You'll be brought right back in. As always, our Untapped New York insiders are here enjoying this program for as little as $10 a month for a virtual membership. You can give us a try by using the code JOIN-US in all caps with the link provided. And there are a ton of links in the chat today. You can learn more about the SS Columbia Project and the good work that they are doing to restore this amazing boat. You can learn more about Sarah Elizabeth Ray, who we will be talking about this evening. You can learn more about Desiree Cooper and the work that she does, and Aaron's amazing film about the Bob Lowe boats, which you will learn more about. And I'm going to keep those. They'll be at the top of the chat, and I'll try to put them in at the bottom of the chat for the end. So before I turn it over to Ian to do some hellos, let me say hello to some of our people who are coming in. Jeffrey Bernard, welcome. Elliot from Las Vegas, welcome. Nancy from Tuckahoe. Diana, welcome. In a taxi headed to Chelsea. Great, Diana. Glad you're here joining us. Gareth from Wales. Good to see you, Gareth. Joe from London. Tom from Atlanta. Beth, good to see you. It's been a while, Beth, from the Upper West Side. Tom Smart from Ontario. And Karen, former Bob Lowe employees. Awesome. Michael from Phoenix, Arizona. Carmen from Miami. Seth from Jersey City. And the list goes on. I am going to make myself scarce. I will be back for Q&A if you need me to facilitate. Ian, I turn it over to you, my friend. Have a great presentation.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I want to thank you and Untapped Cities for having us today and giving us an opportunity to talk a little bit about the SS Columbia and an important role that the vessel played in civil rights history. I want to give a shout out to Fred Osborne, who I see has joined us. Fred was the founding chair of the SS Columbia Project, and he kicked us off several years ago, and we're appreciative of that. Today's focus really is going to be multi-pronged. We want to introduce you to the vessel, the steamer Columbia. I'd like to talk a little bit about our project, the SS Columbia Project, and introduce you to Sarah Elizabeth Ray, who many people don't know about. And I'll save remarks on Sarah till a little bit later. We promised a tour of Columbia, and we'll give you that tour as well by way of photographs that have been taken not too long ago. I'm joined today by several people who are involved in the project. Ray Fusco is a co-chair of the SS Columbia Project. Desiree is also on our board of directors and is a nice tie-in to the Sarah Elizabeth Ray Project. And we're grateful to Aaron and are welcoming, and we welcome Aaron here too. Aaron produced the film that we'll see today, the little five-minute short video on the subject of Sarah Elizabeth Ray. Columbia is a steamboat that was built in 1902 in Detroit. And I'd like to start by showing you some original photographs of the vessel from the early years. And this photograph was taken, I'm pretty sure, in 1902, but we know that it was taken between 1902 and 1907 by looking at the configuration of the vessel. You'll see on the top deck the top deck actually stops before it hits the forward end of the boat and before it hits the aft end of the boat. And the vessel's top deck was extended in 1907 to provide more coverage. But this really shows the boat in her grandeur. She's a smart-looking vessel, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the aspects of the boat. But she was designed by a naval designer named Frank Kirby, and the interiors were done by a guy named Louis O'Kyle. Frank Kirby designed many of the great steamboats in the United States, both on the Hudson River and for the Great Lakes, but also for the Mississippi River. And the boats had different characters depending on where they were located. This is another photograph of Columbia from the early years. This one was taken after 1908 because we can see that the aft deck was extended to the end at the back. This is a later photograph. This was taken after 1918 because the top deck was extended forward in 1918, and you get a sense of what it must have been like for people to be on the boat. And this is sort of the boarding process. The boat traveled between the foot of Woodward Avenue and an island named Bois Blanc Island in the Detroit River. And part of our story today is going to involve a national boundary. Detroit, of course, is in Michigan, and Bois Blanc Island is in Ontario. So the boat crossed an international border in going from Detroit to Bois Blanc Island. I think I said Bois Blanc Island a few seconds ago. I guess Americans had a hard time saying, and Canadians too, had a hard time saying the original name, Île Bois Blanc. So it just became accepted to call it Bois Blanc Island. And while the island is still called Bois Blanc Island now, the amusement park that developed on the island was called Bois Blanc Island. And so these terms are often used interchangeably. This photograph is sort of the famous photograph of the boat. We call this the glamour shot. It was taken by William Taylor, and it dates sometime before 1942 and after 1918. And we can tell that because of the forward deck and the stack. The smokestack was changed in 1941 or 42 because the fuel system of the vessel was changed from burning coal to bunker C. And with coal, a steam engine needs a very tall stack for draft to develop to pull the smoke away from the boilers and the fire pit. With bunker C, it's a little cleaner, and a tall stack isn't quite as necessary. I want to say one thing about this smoke. Everyone always looks at these photographs and they say, "Oh my God, these are so dirty. These boats are so dirty," and they aren't really. A steam engine is quite a clean burning engine, and often there would be a desire on the behalf of the photographers to have smoke because it would show the boat moving through the water, and it would give this sense of movement. And so we'll see a lot of smoke in these old photographs, but the reality is that these engines aren't so bad for pollution. This is, we're going to jump forward. This is in dry dock in Toledo, Ohio. And ironically, this boat was put in dry dock in Toledo in exactly the same place where Columbia's sister ship, St. Clair, was built. There were two of these boats that were built and served the people of Detroit. Columbia was built in 1902 and St. Clair was built in 1910. And that's an interesting thing. It tells us that that Columbia was pretty successful in her early years, and a lot of people wanted to get out on the water and take the ride to what was not an amusement park at the time, but what was really a nature preserve and a picnic area. And over time, use of the boat changed and use of the island changed because the operators of the vessel wanted to keep the vessel filled with people all the time. And initially people would go for a picnic or a day trip to the island and just enjoy this natural surroundings of the river and the island itself. And so as to attract people at night, the company operating the vessel built a big dance hall. And this became typical of these amusement park settings, and dance halls were often a part of it. Here in Buffalo, where I am and where the boat is docked, there was a similar vessel that would ply the waters of Lake Erie, taking people from Buffalo to an amusement park called Crystal Beach at a place called Crystal Beach. And like Boblo Island, Crystal Beach had a big dance hall, and that was part of the draw. Notice the propeller. Isn't that an interesting shape? A propeller for a steamboat, for some reason, has a different shape than a propeller for modern diesel or diesel electric vessels. This is after we finished the hull restoration in 2015, and you'll notice that gleaming white hull. She's so beautiful. And the superstructure's still in pretty rough shape, but the hull here is what draws my attention. And we were very happy to have this work done. The boat spent about a year in dry dock in Toledo before we moved her to Buffalo. One of the most exciting things about the vessel, and you can tell from the topic of our conversation today, is this interesting story about Sarah Elizabeth Ray. And this was a story that when the Columbia Project acquired the vessel, we didn't know anything about Sarah Elizabeth Ray, and we discovered a reference to Sarah Elizabeth Ray and an important Supreme Court case that involved the civil rights of African-American people traveling on the boat. And it turns out that 10 years before Rosa Parks and the bus, there was Sarah Elizabeth Ray and the boat. And there may well be connections between the two, because we know that there are some of the people who were involved were the same people in both cases. Some pretty big names like Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP. But so as not to preempt the film that we're going to see, I won't say anything more about this. And now I'd like to introduce Aaron Schillinger, who I am eternally grateful to, because he, after I made reference once to the need for a short video highlighting the civil rights history of Columbia and Sarah Elizabeth Ray, developed this magnificent short film on that subject. And with that, I introduce Aaron Schillinger.
Thanks, Ian, and thank you all for being here. I'm excited to share this history, and I think Ian has already done an excellent job of setting up the history of the amusement park Boblo Island. So without further ado, I'm going to play the film, and then Desiree and Ray and Ian and I can continue the presentation and talk more about what's in store for the Sarah Elizabeth Ray project and the SS Columbia project and the Boblo Boats film. So here we go.
For real, Sarah Elizabeth Ray did pave the way for the change of law in the United States. So the year was 1945, and Sarah Elizabeth Ray had graduated from a secretarial school. She was working in a city ordinance department, and that department had a special program where people could get extra training, and she was the only African American in the group. So for their graduation, they decided they were going to ride the Boblo boat. Boblo is a huge thing in Detroit. I mean, it's iconic. It means summer, and people have such fond memories of going to Boblo on the Boblo boat as children. I assumed everything had been segregated at some point, so I wasn't shocked that it was segregated. What's a little shocking to me is how quickly the Detroit community was willing to forget and forgive the racist history of the Boblo company.
You're making people uncomfortable, miss.
Well, that's their problem.
Now is when you're supposed to get off my boat.
That was a very deep cut, both to her as a human being, but also as a woman who had accomplished probably more than anybody in her family at that time. It's hard to imagine like the shame and embarrassment that she must have undergone in that moment. And there are people who kind of skulk away and don't fight, but for her, that was like, oh no, you know, I've come too far and they're not getting away with this. She went straight to the NAACP and reported what happened, and they took the case. And one thing that people don't know is that once the NAACP got involved, Thurgood Marshall actually got on the case. So according to the Michigan Civil Rights Act, you could not discriminate on the basis of race in public accommodations. But Bob Lowe kept appealing. What the courts found is that it was a public accommodation and they could not discriminate on the basis of race. So woohoo! Sarah won. And that was sort of the end of that fight in that moment. But it had given Thurgood Marshall yet one more test of what was the Supreme Court's appetite for ruling that separate but equal in public accommodations and public spaces would be unconstitutional. And so his next trip to the Supreme Court was Brown versus Board of Education. We tend to think that things move seismically, like things just sort of wake up and the earth cracks open. And what we don't quite get is that it's a chipping until change happens. And the people who chip, quite often when they start, are very alone and do it at great personal risk. I met Sarah Elizabeth Ray in February of 2006. Her anger was still there. Her indignation was still there. I mean, it was very clear to me that she was a forgotten person. She won't be nameless because of efforts to tell her story.
Well, thank you for watching. I think I can just close that out there. Oh, there we go. As you can see, one of the panelists here, Desiree Cooper, was an expert historian. You could call her in the video, because she was the only person I was able to find who had actually met Sarah Elizabeth Ray. And I just want to, before we kind of go into more of the history of Columbia and the implications of Sarah Elizabeth Ray's actions that day, I just want to mention also that Desiree Cooper and I have partnered on a longer project telling the full story of Sarah Elizabeth Ray, and we're calling that project Sarah Elizabeth Ray Project. And so hopefully if we have some more time later, we can talk about that, but I definitely want to make sure to turn things back over to Ian now. Unless, and let me know if you want me to share some photos, Ian, as well.
I think maybe some photos would be good now. The photos that I saw, the new photos that you have, help to personalize Sarah. And sometimes with history, we think of people as figures. And I'm so glad that Desiree had an opportunity to meet Sarah, because this was a real human person and had a real human experience. And it's one that I think we could all learn from. And I wonder, Desiree, if you might say a few words about your experience meeting Sarah.
Mm-hmm. I met her in February of 2006, and she passed away in August of that year. And so it was almost a near miss. At the time, I was a columnist with the Detroit Free Press. And yeah, Aaron has up the story that I wrote after I met her. And that picture down at the bottom is who she was at that time. And as I say in that clip of the film, she was very much forgotten. She lived alone. It was February. The house was cold. And I just felt sad after I heard her tell her story, that so few people in Detroit itself, but also Americans don't know the story of her in the Boblo boat. As you said before so eloquently, Ian, we have Rosa in the bus, we have Sarah in the boat. I mean, these people there's probably a train story, there's probably a plane story, I don't know. It's so many people had contributed to history, and those names we'll never know. I am happy, though, that with working with the Columbia Project, that history is going to be incorporated into the history of the boat itself. These are some archival photos that Erin is showing that we found. Later in life, Sarah met a labor activist, Raphael Haskell. That's him in the plaid shirt. And together they formed Action House on Detroit's East Side and continued their civil rights work and neighborhood empowerment work. So here she is shortly after the 1967 rebellion in Detroit, holding court as we think she was a pretty strong personality and trying to get resources and accountability for her community. We think this was taken because the date at the top of the photo says May 68, and this is in DC as part of the memorials following Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination. And this is a copy of the transcript of her trip to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's interesting that the Boblo Excursion Company lost at every level of adjudication, from the local trial court all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. They never stopped appealing to get the decision overturned. We're not going to be able to see this closely, but one interesting aspect of her is this is an article about some of her community work. And in the beginning, the article, she says she changed her name to Liz Haskell. Remember, she married Raphael Haskell. And it wasn't Sarah Elizabeth Haskell, but Liz Haskell, Lizz. And that was so that people would always remember her. The irony of it is that it really impeded our ability to do research on her, because we were looking for Sarah Elizabeth Ray and we did not find her. If we looked for Liz Haskell, we would have found more information. So it kind of took us on a wild goose chase for a while.
Back when I was making the stop motion animation, I actually did not, because of she changed the name, the spelling of her name and everything, I didn't actually have many photos to go off of when we did stop motion animation. And just also of interest is this is where her house still stands in Detroit, and the Sarah Elizabeth Ray Project is working with the city of Detroit to possibly preserve the house and connect the house virtually with the SS Columbia, which is interesting things you can do nowadays with laser scans, which Ian is going to show you the laser scan of Columbia in a few moments here. And this is just a picture.
Do we think she was the last resident of the house? She must have been, since there's so many materials left.
Yeah, because inside there's we got permission from the owners of the house, which is actually the city, to go inside. And it's a picture of me standing inside the house. And there were personal possessions of Sarah, prescription pill bottles, letters that she had written. And this is all stuff that is going to be very instrumental to our research. And so we're really hoping to be able to someday get access to those. And the last picture here is a photograph that we found inside that we scanned on site, also of Sarah Elizabeth Ray. Now, we don't know when this was taken, but she certainly looks happy in that moment. And powerful too. It's a really great photo of her. And so that's the end of my slide presentation. But
and we did have just a quick pop-up question, and that is whether or not the Boblo Company ever celebrated her efforts in later years. It was sold, and the new owners had no problem with the integration. And this is one of the mysteries of Detroit because Boblo means summer in Detroit, and everyone of all stripes loved going to Boblo Island. So I think once it reopened, it was like everyone was like, okay, well, that's over. Let's just let bygones be bygones, and let's have a happy time sailing on the Columbia up and down the Detroit River into the amusement park. So the original company did not celebrate her efforts, and the successor companies didn't talk about it, but was welcoming to people of all stripes.
It's worth noting, I think, that toward the end of the company's life, there was a sense that the two steamers that were bringing people back and forth from the foot of Woodward Avenue in Detroit to the island were an unnecessary expense. And so the boats were taken out of service. Their last run was on Labor Day, 1991. And the company thought, okay, we'll save all this money and we'll make money on the park. And what ended up being evident is that many people who were going to the park, the amusement park, were going for the ride on the boat. Because what happened when the boats were taken out of service is that attendance at the park just plummeted. And they ended up going out of business 2 years later. So it's a sort of a sad story. I might also mention that in many places in the United States, this idea of having a steamboat to board to take you to an amusement park was actually much more common than one might imagine. There were two amusement parks on the Hudson River, one at Bear Mountain and one where the Indian Point nuclear power plant is, which is going out of service. Yay. So it was a tradition in New York as well for people to go from New York up to Bear Mountain or to where the in Verplanck, where the other amusement park was. Detroit had one. Buffalo had a boat also designed by Frank Kirby. And so this was a pattern of the time.
And there was also an effort in Detroit to get one to Sugar Island that was predominantly for African Americans. So, they decided they would try to replicate that, again, using a steamboat to take people back and forth to an island amusement park.
Right. I find some of the history here quite interesting, and not only the history itself, but I find it interesting that certain parts of history are really not apparent to us now. We don't really, until we discovered Sarah Elizabeth Ray and Aaron and Desiree started working on
this. We discovered in quotes.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't discover it, but until we sort of stumbled over this story, and until Aaron and Desiree got involved, Sarah's work and role in sort of setting the stage for the civil rights movement might have not really been known widely. And yet here it is, an individual person standing up for their rights. Sarah must have been pretty sharp. She would have known the laws of Michigan, and she knew the laws prevented this sort of discrimination. And so she stood up for her rights, and she was astute enough to go to somebody she thought could help, and that is the NAACP in Detroit. And they were astute enough to pick this up. But I don't think Sarah's experience was that unique. I think this was happening to people a lot. And for some reason, the NAACP decided to help Sarah out and take her case on. And that it went all the way to the Supreme Court and she won is pretty remarkable. And I think it's so interesting to reveal this unknown history because we can build bridges and draw links between what happened earlier with what happened later. And for me, this is a story that deserves a much wider audience. And so if we can help tell that story as we restore and bring Columbia back, we're happy to do that.
There were a couple of questions that came in quickly I thought might be interesting. Desiree, Mel had asked, do we know much about her early life prior to the research you've done, where she grew up and things like that?
We know that she grew up in Tennessee, outside of Chattanooga, and she was part of the Great Migration North, left Tennessee as an older teenager, around 18 or 19, and came to Detroit for the opportunities there. So again, when I talked in the film about it being a slap, I mean, she didn't come to be thrown off boats and to not, she came for opportunity. So that's about, we don't know a ton. Her family was large, and she did face a lot of segregation and discrimination in Tennessee before she came north. But we're trying to figure out more.
Yeah. And then Michael had asked, did the Boblo Company ever celebrate this with Sarah? I'm guessing
Right.
not.
Right.
Yeah. And just to give folks a sense of scale, in its heyday, in its operation, the Columbia would have taken around 3,000 passengers. And with our current restoration efforts, we're looking with modern day capacities to about 1,500 passengers. So it took a significant amount of people back and forth to the island.
Thanks, Ray. Ian, were you going to kind of take us back on the boat now? And there we go. I think his
there
connection.
was a connection issue. Yeah, Ian.
Yeah.
I can do a virtual tour of the Sarah Elizabeth Ray house real quick while we're waiting for Ian to get back.
That'd be great.
Let's see here. Now, one of the cool things about I was talking about connecting the SS Columbia virtually to Sarah Elizabeth Ray's house, and that's through this technology where you actually use a laser scanner and it shoots out. You can create cloud points of data. And so this is a walkthrough that I went ahead and just recorded as a video, but soon this will be accessible to anyone on the website to be able to virtually kind of walk through the space. And so this is inside Sarah Elizabeth Ray's house, photographed by the laser scan cameras last summer. Somebody dumped tires inside the house. Obviously, those were not back from when she lived there. But as you can see, and I'll kind of stop the tour here because I think we should skip over to the Columbias. But these are all of her personal artifacts in here. Ian, did you want to? We lost you for a second, but
I'm sorry. My connection got dropped, but I'm back, and
okay, great.
We promised you a visit with Columbia itself, and so let's get you there now. I heard on the tail end that Aaron mentioned the laser scan. 2 summers ago, we did a laser scan of the interior of Columbia, and I'd like to share with you some of those images. First, I'll show a little bit of the fun images of Columbia leaving Toledo. Here she's being removed from her dry dock and towed on Lake Erie. It was a strange, foggy day, a hot, foggy day when she was moved. And as she came into Buffalo Harbor, it mysteriously got clear, and the fireboat that was out to welcome her was magnificent, and it was just a great day. She wound her way up the Buffalo River and is now docked at a place in Buffalo called Silo City, which is a wonderful area. Buffalo used to be the site of more grain elevators than any other place in the world, because at the end of the Lake Erie, there was Niagara Falls, so boats could only come so far before things had to be moved. And so this is really in an interesting area. Columbia was built in 1902. Ironically, the first poured concrete grain elevator is on this site, and it was built in 1905. So that's what the boat looks like now, and in her current location. We did a lot of work on the vessel to stabilize her and make her safe for us to be on. When the SS Columbia project acquired the vessel, it was in pretty rough shape, and she remains in pretty rough shape, but it was also filled with stuff. When the boat went out of service in 1991, I think it was put away, and everybody imagined she'd be back in service in 1992. And that wasn't the case. And so we had to remove an awful lot of stuff from the boat. And these photographs that I've just shown are pictures of the people doing work on it. We were able to offer tours of the boat in both in Toledo and when we arrived in Buffalo. And particularly in Toledo, it was fun to give these tours because a lot of people who came on the tours were people who'd worked on the boats or who were real great fans of Boblo Island and traveled on the boats many times. We used the vessel on one occasion since coming to Buffalo, as a setting for a play that a really innovative theater company here in Buffalo designed a play called Burden, which was staged on board on 2 levels as well as around the silos. But this photograph we're looking at now, or this image that we're looking at now, is an image that was taken when we were doing the 360-degree scan, and we did both the 360-degree photos, took 360-degree photos, sort of like a Google Street View allows, and we also did a laser scan, which measured all of the points in the vessel. So I'm just going to run through this. And I see we're starting on the second deck. Something has happened to my slideshow. I intended us to start at the first deck, but this is the ballroom on board, and this is the very first time a ballroom was featured on a steamboat in the United States. And you can see this interesting structure down the center of the ceiling, this arch structure. Prior to Columbia, the steamboats had, usually they had wooden superstructures. And Columbia, it was early in the combination of the combined use rather of wood and steel. Frank Kirby, who designed the boat, wanted to create some open spaces on board, and he designed this arch structure with the holes in it as a fairly lightweight way to hold up the superstructure. And so instead of having to have posts every 10 feet, we have this long support structure in the middle of the vessel from one end of the ballroom to the other. This is looking aft on that same level. And here you can see, you know, she's in rough shape. If you talk to people in Detroit who traveled on the boat many times, they'll always mention music. Music seems to, the boats always elicit a smile from people of a certain age, and they'll usually then talk about music. You hear stories of people having their first kiss on board Columbia, and that's always fun to hear. Again, ballroom. When the vessel, prior to the project owning the vessel, the previous owner had shrink wrapped it in plastic, and that sort of created a mini climate, and I think helped to make the rot a little bit easier. And there were parts of the roof that were gone. And so when we acquired the vessel, we were concerned about water coming in from the top more than water coming in from the bottom. The boat had a double hull structure, which was not the first time this technology was used, but there was a concern that in the Detroit River, motorboat races were becoming popular in 1902, and there was a concern that everybody on board the boat might move from one side to the other. So there was this steam-powered pump system which pumped water from the river into the space between these two hulls and in segmented compartments, and that would allow the boat to be stabilized and stay steady even if everyone were on one side. What we're looking forward here, and we're looking at the one part of the boat on sort of the upper decks, which is enclosed. And this was a mahogany paneled room. And we don't have as many photographs of the interior and as many records of the interior as we might like. Frank Kirby left all of his papers to the University of Bowling Green in Kentucky. And so we have good history of the boat. Louis O'Kyle, the interior designer, didn't leave his papers to anybody except his family, and they were left in, you know, a cottage somewhere in Michigan, and they were lost really to history. So we're always looking for old interior photographs. This is again in that space forward. The boat changed many times over the years, and the structure changed, and you can sort of get a sense here where the light is coming in on that far side. That the whole edge of the vessel on this level would have been maybe stained glass or cut leaded glass would have been featured. And Frank Kirby was really brilliant in how he used light. And the boat was electrified in 1902 when it was launched. It had electricity and it had lights, but I'm guessing that it wouldn't be lights as we think of lights now. And so that they may have been a little bit dim at night. And during the daytime, these windows that Frank Kirby designed into each level would have really helped bring a lot of light into the interior of the vessel. Okay. Again, you get a sense of what we're looking at here in this square structure in the back was what the structure that encased the smokestack. And where that paneling is, the plywood panel there, was actually a big mirror One of our earliest difficult experiences with Columbia was when we were asked to have an asbestos evaluation done of the boat. And when the asbestos inspectors came on board, we were a little concerned that the boat might be loaded with asbestos, and certainly they found asbestos. Obviously, it was around the boilers of the vessel. Surprisingly, there was no asbestos in the galley. The pipes in the galley were covered with something else. There was a lot of asbestos in the linoleum tile, which was not unusual for old structures and old linoleum tile. The big fear was that there would be asbestos in the paint. Asbestos was often mixed into paint, and there was a moment of panic when the asbestos inspectors started to sample the paint, because if the paint had come back with asbestos in it, we would not have been able to carry on. Fortunately, it did not. The reason we're showing these photographs of the vessel is to give you some idea of what she might have been like, and the views that you might have seen looking out from the vessel. So we've gone up a level here into the beer garden deck. This is called the trunk deck. And you'll see that there's a staircase that goes up to that raised area. And this is an area which had limited access, so that it could be actually a beer garden under the liquor laws that would have been applicable in Michigan at the time. But again, around the edge, underneath that railing, there would have been windows there, and that they were all filled in over the years. And the same thing would have been true of the ballroom. It would have had stained glass and cut glass windows there. Again, this is the area where we think that Sarah Elizabeth Ray was removed from. The records show that Sarah said that she was on the top deck. And I think by top deck, she probably meant the top enclosed deck. There was a possibility at the time of going up one and being in an area outside near the pilot house, but I don't think people would refer to that as kind of the top deck. So I think she probably would have been here. The tradition on board was that when you boarded the vessel, there were hundreds and hundreds of wooden chairs, folding chairs, stacked around these edges, and there were not fixed seats the way we might find them in a modern vessel. There were these folding chairs, and you'd grab enough folding chairs for your group, and you'd set them out and enjoy the ride. And so we think that we know that it's this deck from which Sarah was removed, and I like to imagine that it's in this area. I don't know why, I just feel that. Okay, here again is the stack, the casing around the stack, and we're looking back at the beer garden. You can see it's quite long. The boat is 207 feet long and 60 feet wide. The width of the hull itself is 45 feet wide, and there's another 15 feet that's divided up on each side, and there are beams that come out supporting the structure. And again, imagine if this were restored, how much fun it might be under steam, underway. And again, the views here are magnificent. Again, we're looking back, looking up at the top deck. There was also a structure of canvas curtains on every level and around every overhang, so that if wind were coming from one direction and it was chilly, you could drop these canvas curtains to shelter people and they could see out the other side. All right. So it was suggested that our remarks should be about 45 minutes in length, and we're coming up to that now. And so if anyone has any questions or wants to talk about Columbia in any particular way, you might register them now. I've got a few more shots that I'd like to show you of how we envision the boat might look when she's restored. And this is a rendering of Columbia as she might appear once we restore her. And this imagines what she might look like on the, this is called the promenade deck, and this is the area where the chairs would originally have been, and outside of that protected area, and where the ballroom is. The grand staircase. And we have the ballroom. We've gotten some support over the years from various organizations and press, and this just really lists a few of them. But we've got a series of articles that we can share and that are available on our website. This is our website. We could use help. This kind of project would not be possible without broad support. I don't know that we could finance the project with small donations, but we need small donations to go to larger funders to suggest that there is enough support for this kind of effort that justifies investment from grants, foundations, and individuals who have the capacity to support us. With that, I invite questions and comments.
So, Ian, thank you very much. And also, please don't feel, if you have more you want to show, go ahead. Don't rush. I don't want to rush you, but
right.
Well, I go ahead.
I could talk a little bit about the phases that we've been through with the boat. The project required.
So, some of the questions that are coming out are about the latest efforts to restore her, and then the Hudson River plan. Michael asked, what's the latest restore efforts, and it seems like the Hudson plan is changing a bit. So, I mean, if you want to address that, why don't you do so?
Yeah, I mean that goes right to the heart of the issues that we face, and the board of directors made a decision earlier this year that we weren't finding the kind of support that we needed, and the move to the Hudson Valley would be a super expensive one. When we brought the boat to Buffalo, the Coast Guard had authorized us to tow the vessel to New York. But I think that assumed that we were going to be in a position to tow the vessel to New York quite quickly. And Buffalo has some pretty harsh winters, and the Coast Guard later suggested that towing the boat to New York would not be a good idea, and they would not permit it, and suggested that the way that we would need to get the boat from Buffalo to New York would be to tow her to Montreal and put her on the back of a submersible ship, which is designed to carry other ships and very large objects. Well, there aren't a whole lot of these submersible ships available in the world, and Shell and ExxonMobil and other well-heeled organizations seem to have booked them quite far in advance, and I'm not sure that these providers are so eager to talk to a nonprofit that's trying to restore an old boat. And so we've really been forced by that circumstance and funding considerations to really reconsider whether or not we can make it to New York. And when we became aware of the Sarah Elizabeth Ray story, we really had a new responsibility provided to us. Really, it's more important to think about how we might restore the boat to tell this history than it is, I think, to take the boat to New York to have a lovely way to get out on the water on the Hudson Valley. It would have been perfect for the Hudson Valley, but it just didn't stack up that way. And so we are now looking for partners and people to work with who might be interested in this historic angle and in talking about the civil rights role the boat played. It is remarkable that Sarah Elizabeth Ray, this young woman, stood up for her rights, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and nobody knows about it. And so we do really have an opportunity to help reveal some unknown history. And I have a feeling that there are lots of these kinds of stories that need to be revealed. And if we can be part of one of those great reveals, it would be a marvelous thing. As far as the rest.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. A good question came in, which ties.
I was going to talk a little bit about the restoration.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Let me talk about the restoration first. Initially, the focus initially was just on maintaining the vessel and making sure that we had a vessel that we could save. And so while the boat was in Detroit, we were doing things like removing all of this. We took 5 tractor trailer size dumpsters of debris off the boat, people's shoes and, cabinets and all kinds of stuff. I mean, people literally left the boat. People who worked on the boat tended to come back year after year. And people left the boat in the fall of 1991, I think anticipating they'd be back in 1992. And there were really kind of interesting spaces. There was one space that had been turned into a dark room. The very forward crew cabin abutting the engine room was a single cabin, and we met the guy who had that cabin in Toledo, and he came to see the boat. And I had always wondered why all of the windows and the vents and everything in that particular room were covered up with masking tape and cardboard. And he asked if I'd seen his dark room, and I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he took me down and he showed me his room, and I thought, well, how on earth did you get this cabin if you were only on the boat for one summer? That was my first question. And he said it was about 120 degrees in that cabin and nobody else wanted it. And then the second question was really, how did you do this? How did you develop photographs? And he had an album of photographs which he had taken and developed on board the boat, and he showed me where he had a table and an enlarger, and he had a whole system set up, and the source of water was across the hall at the facilities on board for crew, and that was kind of fun.
So Ian, really quickly, I saw somebody had posted, they were curious about this stuff. So there wasn't anything of historical significance. It was all just kind of, one left shoe was left behind. Is that what it was?
Yeah, unless you consider a shaker bottle of Old Dutch cleanser historical, there was just not very, we left some of this stuff just for fun. There are still some shoes on board. And there was a crew cabin that originally was a dining room for passengers below decks. And there were some conversions over time of these spaces because labor laws changed. And the stuff that was left behind wasn't, it was 1991. And so you found objects that would have been used in 1991. And they were all personal sort of stuff, nothing relating to the boat. So the restoration initially was really to clean the boat up and prepare her for the movement from Detroit to Toledo, where we could put her in dry dock. Over the years, we've had to put a lot of support structures in place. When the boat was out of the water in Toledo, we discovered there were tons of zebra mussels on the hull. And so those needed to be removed. And when we removed those, we discovered that the hull was in much worse shape than we expected. And so the replating of 500 square feet that we expected to have to do turned into replating 60% of the hull. And that involved a lot more spending than we had envisioned. So we blew a lot of our budget on that. And when we brought the boat to Buffalo, again, our job really is to protect the vessel and ensure that she's available for future efforts and our efforts if we get to the point where we can raise the kind of money we need. And it's a lot of money. We need $20 million to finish the job. That is if we want to have the boat steaming under her own power. And there are some questions about the Coast Guard and the permissions they might or might not give us. And so maybe we ought to be considering a phased approach where we make her a stationary display, cultural center attraction to tell the Sarah Elizabeth Ray story and other stories before, we can always restore her further later. But the job right now is really to stabilize the vessel and make her available for future efforts.
And to Gareth's question about the stuff, it's interesting. The board of directors just received a wonderful inquiry from a woman who was in possession of a mahogany door that she was told was part of the Boblo boats, and she's reached out to us and offered to donate it to us, and we'll be in connection with her. And from time to time, we do get people who have something or think they have something of value. We do have a collection of things that are of value from the vessel in the board's possession. Ian has many of them, and so from time to time we will get random inquiries from folks saying, I think I have something terrific. And then they reach out to us and we work with them.
It's sometimes a little hard to tell. Columbia is not exactly, an infrequently used name. And so we received a set of sugar tongs once that said Columbia on them. And somebody said, I got some sugar tongs, some silver-plated sugar tongs from your boat, and we graciously accepted them. I have a feeling that probably there were not a lot of silver-plated sugar tongs used on board Columbia.
Mel asked a really great question, which I think a lot of people are wondering is how did you acquire the boat? I know the story, but a lot of people.
Well, this is an interesting story, and it allows me to talk a little bit about the founder of the project, Richard Anderson. Richard Anderson was a guy who grew up in Brooklyn and on the Hudson River in Upper Nyack, and he had spent his early years watching boats or the lack of boats on the Hudson River. He always felt that he was an only child initially, and I think, and his mother was an emergency medicine doctor who specialized in emergency medicine, and I expect that she worked quite long hours. And I got to know Richard quite well, and we became partners. Richard died, sadly, in January of 2013. But as I understand it and have gleaned from the conversations that I had with him, he initially, in his very earliest years, used to go and spend time with his cousin Nancy at her beauty parlor when he was a kid before his mother came home from her work. So he'd go from school to cousin Nancy's beauty parlor. And then he got old enough to really manage on his own. He would go to the Brooklyn Library and pore through documents. I understand from his family and from Richard that he was initially fascinated with trains, and that converted later to a fascination with boats. When he was about 12, the Seaport Museum in New York, South Street Seaport Museum, had been formed, and he called up and made an appointment to see the president, Peter Stamford, and showed up for his appointment to see Peter Stamford. And as Norman Brower, who was curator of ships at the Seaport Museum at the time, tells it, he marched up to, went up to Peter's, outside of Peter's office, talked to Peter's secretary. He was a little surprised to see a 12-year-old. She walked him into Peter's office and said, "Mr. Anderson is here to see you." And Richard climbed up on the chair and then apparently started to tell Peter all about his boats and how important they were. And so Peter called Norman and said, "Norman, I'd like you to come up to my office." And Norman went up to the office and walked into Peter's office, and at which point Peter introduced Mr. Anderson as Norman's new assistant. And Richard then volunteered his services 3 days a week after school at the South Street Seaport Museum. And this turned into a lifelong passion for him. He always wanted to restore a steamboat, and he felt that there would be enough support on the Hudson to do it. As I tell people, that the Columbia wasn't his first choice. He had another boat that he had discovered, a boat called Catawissa, which was an ocean-going steam tug. And there was a competition for Catawissa, and there were 3 organizations that were vying for Catawissa, and Richard was not successful in winning that bid. Catawissa was scrapped, so it might have been better if it had gone to Richard. But Richard was not stopped easily, and so he started looking for another boat. And the earliest photograph of him with Columbia I have is in 2001. When he visited the boat for the first time. Norman Brower had introduced him to the boat, and he wasn't able to acquire the boat until 2006, December of 2006, because a group in Detroit controlled the boat and was trying to restore it. But they were in trouble. Raising money for an effort like this isn't easy, and it takes a special person to really see the potential here. And the other group was financially in trouble and had debts, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation intervened on Richard's behalf and convinced the other group that this was an important historic asset and it needed to be saved, because this is the last boat of its kind in North America. Many of the European countries have an old boat that the government and other funders have helped to support and restore, or in the Swiss case, they just keep operating them and have for 100 years. Here, it's a little bit trickier. But Richard thought that it was really worth saving Columbia, and I don't think anybody was aware of the civil rights tie-in at the time. But the National Trust paid off the debts of the other group, and the boat was conveyed to Richard's organization, I think for $1. And so he got underway right away and worked tirelessly on this till the day he died in 2013, and we carry on his work now.
Thank you, Ian, for that. And I know we are at we're at 5:59, but there is one question. Actually, there were 2 questions that came in through the question tab. if there is to be power, is there still an idea that the steam boilers and the triple expansion engine would be repaired and used, asks Fred.
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly be our preference. We anticipated when we had the Coast Guard aboard and we made the move, and when the asbestos was taken off the boilers, we anticipated, and it was always Richard's thought, that we would have to replace the boilers. We wanted to keep the front of the boilers so that you could see what that space was like and what boilers look like. But there are modern packet boilers that are much smaller than the boilers on Columbia. Columbia's triple expansion steam engine is a 1,200 horsepower engine. You know, there are many private boats that are 20 feet and less that have that kind of power on them now. But it's an impressive steam plant. And what's really impressive about the boat is that the designers designed it with leaving an impression with the riders of the boat. So the passengers of the boat, there's a viewing gallery around the engine room, which allows kids and adults, anybody, to go up to the edge of this viewing platform and look down and see the steam engine at work. It's a magnificent piece of machinery. And it was turned over by hand in 2006 last. So we know that it's in pretty good shape, and they put this boat away pretty carefully every year. But our preference would be to use the steam plant. The surprise was when the Coast Guard did the analysis and took the readings of the boiler, she was in pretty good shape. The tubes would have to be replaced. A steam boiler of this sort is a Scotch boiler. It has tubes in it that and this big round container, and the fire comes up through it, heating up the water and creating the steam. We just assumed that would all have to be scrapped, and it turns out it's in pretty good shape. The tubes would have to be replaced, but the boilers could be used. It was kind of a magnificent thing that an object from 1902 could still be used, even in the mechanics. And it turns out it's because in all of these years of usage, the boilers were only heated up and cooled down 89 times, because there were 89 seasons where the boat was used, and the boat would always stayed in the water, but the boat would have been prepared for service, and the boilers would have been heated up over the space of 2 or 3 weeks in April or May, and then the boilers wouldn't be cooled down. And again, they'd be cooled down gradually over 2 or 3 weeks in likely October. And so as steam engines go, 89 times to heat it up and cool it down isn't too bad. And so we are optimistic about our ability to restore the power plant that's there, provided we have the cash to do it. It's really a funding exercise more than anything.
Well, thank you, Ian, and thank you all. I am going to wrap it up at 6:02. Thank you, Aaron and Desiree, for telling this extremely important story that goes along with this extremely important historical boat. And I wish you guys luck, and Untapped New York will always be there to help in whatever you guys are doing to raise more awareness about the boat and hopefully more money. If you have any further questions for the SS Columbia project, you can definitely reach out to them. Their site is in the chat. And I thank you all for joining us today. Coming up on the Insiders programming, we have Tuesday, May 11th at 12 p.m., Forgotten Movie Theaters of the Bronx with Jeff Rubin, who's one of our greatest contributors. We are excited about that. On Wednesday, May 12th, we are going inside the Barbizon Hotel with historian and author Paulina Bren. And that is the hotel that set women free. I am in the process of reading the book. And we also have tickets for insiders to the Waterfront conference that is next week, May 10th, 12th, and 14th. We have a certain limited amount of tickets, free tickets for insiders, or if you miss the free tickets, you will get 20% off using the code Untapped20. And I believe Nicole might be putting that in the chat, that link there, as we speak. But I thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, Desiree. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Raymond, for bringing this story to us. And we will keep everybody in posted. Just let us know how it's going. This recording will be made available in about 5 minutes, all who attended, and it will also be in our Insider archives probably tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a really great day.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.